Co-organised the SUG UK in London, which is the SharePoint user group. Andy, one of my colleagues, organises one of the other regions. I've been a member of the SharePoint community since the early 2007 days. I've used SharePoint 2003 upwards. And in my spare time, I'm a wood turner, which is probably as far removed from IT as you can get. So I make vases, occasionally win competitions, and more often than not, go through the bottom of my bowls. And for me, SharePoint and wood turning are very similar. If you're not paying attention, it's very easy to go through the bottom. So just bear that in mind. So today we're going to talk about primarily the list view web part. So I'm aiming this session really at sort of the first and second tier developers, you know, the end users that they load the list view web part on the page, they break out SharePoint Designer, and they get all colourful. So how many people are kind of in that space? Who played with XSLT? Good selection, that's excellent. So we're talking about taking a boring list view web part. Let's face it, the SharePoint 2013 list views, they're nice and modern and minimalistic, but it looks so much better when you take it and do something with it, make it visual. You know, human beings are visual creatures. We like to see the data that we're talking about, so we can take it. So this is a sample of a team session. We'll see this in the demo later. So as I said, primarily first and second tier development. So those guys that will break out SharePoint Designer, quite happily play with perhaps a little bit of XSLT. Now you're going to be looking at HTML, JavaScript. So certainly if you were comfortable with XSLT, you'll be fine. And also developers that want to know what can they do without opening Visual Studio. Everything you see today will work on premises or in Office 365. We're not going to do anything, there's no solution deployment. It's all being done through SharePoint Designer. So as I said, yeah, might not be ideal for someone if you're not comfortable with JavaScript, HTML, CSS, then you're going to have to start reading. There's no avoiding it. It's everywhere in SharePoint 2013. So as I said, if you played in SharePoint Designer before, you'll probably enjoy it. So a quick look at the history. So we used to use SharePoint Designer and the design view. So we were able to do conditional formatting. We played with colors. We could inject hyperlinks. So if you played with SharePoint Designer in 2010, you'll recognize this screen where we could take the priority field and color it and do things like that. So again, just increasing the visual responsiveness of SharePoint. But there's no design view anymore. Who was really disappointed by the design view going? Okay, and of you guys that raise your hands, how many of you are consider yourself just end users, power users? Or are you full-on ITPros, server infrastructure, devs? How many devs have I got in the room? God, you guys are going to hate me. Okay, so I've got a lot of clients where they're power users, the guys that are really interested in SharePoint and taking it. You know, you get the bell curve of apathy for SharePoint, and you get those core people in a client where they're really full on. They want to do everything they can with SharePoint, and so they get SharePoint Designer and they break stuff. And so with a little bit of guidance, we can help them use SharePoint Designer to do stuff to SharePoint that's not going to kill it. And hopefully this is where this session goes. So we used to use XSLT overrides in list views. They are still there in 2013, but they are deprecated. So you can still use them. So everything you developed in 2010 will still work with some tweaks. The key things here is you must remember when you add an XSL link, you have to tell it server render. Again, it does work in Office 365, but Microsoft would prefer you didn't. So if this is familiar with anyone who did XSLT, the one we saw previously with the green, orange, and red statuses would go back one. So this was the wonderful XSL choose. So this is so much easier now to do in JavaScript. It's much more readable than XSL was. So who enjoys writing XSL? I'm really impressed because there's normally at least one person going, oh yes, I enjoy it. I like writing XSL. What I don't like is seeing this screen, because it means that somewhere in your XSL there's a comma or a hash or an ampersand that you can't find, and it will take you 2 or 3 hours to find it. It's not a problem with JavaScript. So again, we could take our boring list views, and there this is a 2010 list view, and we can do nice visualizations with it. I won't profess to being a designer. I'm not. I put colors on and that's about it. So we pay a design agency to do all the really nice CSS, and I just put it in the system. I didn't use a design agency for that. So we could also do custom code solutions. So how many times have you heard a client that says, oh yeah, we want this to look really, really nice, and you go, oh yeah, well that's going to go custom code, and that's going to be a good couple of days development. Then you've got your lifecycle management, and then we've got to do a release cycle. So it has headaches. So again, we're trying to avoid custom code. And so as a result of that, why the focus on client-side rendering? I mean, everything you look at in Office 365 and SharePoint 2013, everything is client-side now. They're really trying to push the load away from the servers. There's one really easy answer. It's cloud. Cloud is the answer to every question you ask Microsoft. Why did we move away from server-side XSLT? Well, we don't want your load on Office 365. So it's client-side. So we're moving the impact of these customizations away from the server. So we're reducing that server load, which for a multi-tenancy environment like Office 365, that's perfect. The less load they have on their servers, they can just concentrate about pushing the information to you. So we're looking at moving that off, and so where does that load go? So it goes onto the client machine. I would hazard a guess that if you look at any machine out in your client environments, they're sitting there. If you look up Task Manager, it's 5%, just hovering along. There's loads of unused RAM. So there's all this amazing power sitting on desktops that's doing nothing. Now, this isn't a new thing. This has been around for a long time. So if anyone recognises this picture, this is Arecibo. I think I pronounced that right. So it's somewhere in South America, I think. It's looking up at the stars. So this is the search for extraterrestrial life. SETI at Home is a program where they send out data to your machine while it's sitting there idle, and it sits there and it calculates things and shoves it back. That's called grid computing. So grid computing has been around for 15, 20 years, I'm guesstimating. And they recognise very early on there's all this spare computing power out there across the internet that they can use. So SETI are doing it, folding at home. So these guys are folding proteins. So they're looking for the cure for cancer, Alzheimer's, this kind of thing. That history, that answer is locked up in our DNA. And they can only do that through the calculations. So they're using our spare computing power to do that. So that just highlights why we're moving all of this server-side stuff onto the client. It comes with a warning. Not every machine out there in your clients will cope with this. So I did a 2010 deployment about 18 months ago. And the entire project team had wonderful laptops. They're Lenovo W510s, lots of JavaScript. It was really good. And then they released the proof of concept. And the editors that were going, oh man, it's so slow. It takes ages to create a page. And they were using these devices because they're cheap. So these are £80 dumb terminals, basically. And inside them is a processor with less power than my iPhone. Sorry, my Windows phone. So be aware of your client estate. If you're going to be doing, and we are doing in 2013 a lot more client side, be aware if you've got these boxes, test them heavily. A lot of the newer ones now, certainly some by Asus, are just as powerful as the laptops. But if they're running the ARM processors or some of the other smaller ones, just be aware of that. So why JavaScript, HTML, and CSS? So those points are kind of the key ones. It's easier to develop than XSLT. It's definitely much simpler than XSLT. Definitely easier to troubleshoot than XSLT. So likely to have the skills in-house is slightly contentious. Nearly everyone in a client in the IT department has probably played with the internet and done their own HTML websites that probably look really good. And it's kind of cross-platform. It doesn't really matter if you're in a Mac, some ropey old Linux thing, or a wonderful Windows machine. It is cross-platform, and the frameworks we're using, like jQuery, will help with that. So we're going to talk about now what a display template is. So we've covered off what is client-side rendering. I'm not going to go too deep on the client-side rendering. We're just specifically looking at list view web parts and how display templates are. So basically what it is exactly is a piece of JavaScript code. So SharePoint just dumps your data on the page, and says, right, I'm done. And then it passes that data to our display template after the page has been delivered. So, all the server-side stuff's done. The page is on your desktop. Then our JavaScript runs. So this is why if you've got a slow client, you're going to see page updates taking time. You're going to see the page build. They are prolific in SharePoint 2013, so you can't get away from display templates. If you're working with 2013, you will be using them. Search results, field rendering, search refiners, all of the list forms, the list views, and also e-discovery if you're using e-discovery at all. There's just a few examples. So the visual search refiners, search results, that's the e-discovery. So if you're interested in going into sort of the control templates and things like that, Elio's session after mine, I'm not sure what room he's in, he's doing display templates from a development point of view. So if you are interested, definitely go and have a look at that one. He's going to talk about how we start gluing some of these together in things like search and the old sort of content query web part. So we're going to look at field rendering display templates, where we can just affect one single field in a view, and list view display templates. We're going to override the entire view. So this is where we're going to start getting a little bit devy. We're not going to go too deep in code, but we're basically going to talk about the process. Now, all of the code from this session I'll make available, and the slides will be on SlideShare, and I know the guys are recording it, so don't worry too much about getting deep into what the different functions are. That'll all be available to have a dig through. So we're going to talk first about the function that registers our display template. So this is where we tell SharePoint, this is our template that I want to use for this particular list view. We're going to define the function that each display template calls, and then at the end of it, we're actually going to call the register. So there's a specific reason why we do this, and we'll step through that. So the first thing we do when we're defining a display template is we've got to tell SharePoint what this display template's for. So we do this, we create our nice template object, and we can define for a list view a header, a footer. We can tell it which function we're going to use for the item. And the key thing here is the base view and the list template type. So Microsoft provide a list of, in fact it's this shortcode here, a list of all the different list template types. So we're using 100, which is a custom list. Now in nearly every deployment I've done, I think nearly every list is a custom list. Unless you're using announcements or the calendar, everything else is going to probably be custom. That does give us some problems later on. But for now, nearly all of the demos you'll see today will be a list template type of 100. And the last thing we do is we use this bit of client code that says, hey SharePoint, this is my display template that I want to use. So the function that we're calling, so we've got one here that says custom item. What this is saying is basically when you render the list view, call this function for every single item in the results. So if you've got 100 list items on your page, it's going to call the next function 100 times. Each time it does that, it's going to pass the object in through our function. And I'm doing a very simple thing. I'm just literally going to return a list item here. A couple of things to point out is the way that the ctx.currentItem is our list row. All of the field names are available straight after that object, so you don't need to go and start digging into the XSLT to find out what that item node title is. You can just go onto the field in SharePoint, click Edit Field in the list view, and the internal name will be at the very end of the URL. And basically, when you're typing a JavaScript, you can type ctx.currentItem, and that should pop up. If you're getting the nice IntelliSense, the title should pop up for you. So the last thing we do is we actually have to tell SharePoint at the end of our display template, run this register function, and that will call all the stuff we've set up. And then as the page finishes, SharePoint knows, oh, I've got this display template I can use. So that was for a list view. It's slightly different for a field rendering. We still have the base view ID. We don't need to use the list template type because basically it will apply it to whichever field you're putting in. The important thing is the way we build this field object. So again, we're using the internal name. Can everyone see that, by the way? It's probably a bit small for you guys at the back. As I said, the slides will be available. So we're using the internal name here, and we're telling it is the view field. So there's 4 types of field overrides we can do. There's view, display, edit and new. View and display are generally the same thing. Edit and new are generally the same thing. The key thing about doing the edits and the news means you can start doing things like parent and child list lookups. You know, you can start to get really powerful with these. And wherever you want to as an end user, it's up to you. There's some really good sessions. I've got some links at the end of this session that goes to Martin Hatch's blog. He's done a lot of work with sort of the edit and the new renders. So they're worth having a look at. But this time, so there's no headers and footers. We're just focusing just on the field. So every time that field is called, this render template will get called. And we can register multiple here. Although here I'm only calling the one, we could do this for 10, 20 fields, as many as we want. And they can call different templates, or they can all call the same one. So one of the demos we're going to see later on is about temperatures. And I'm calling January, February, March, April, May, and they're all calling the same one. So again, the render function is very similar to the list view. You've still got access to the CTX current item, and this is where the power comes in. So you might want to do a lookup based on a field value elsewhere in that same item, and we can now do that. So whereas before in XSLT you couldn't do things like, you know, list column. If you wanted parent and child list select lookups, anything like that, then what's the word? Cascading drop down. Sorry, you couldn't do that without custom code. It's now possible. So how do we use them with a list view? So the first thing we need to do is we need to get them into SharePoint. So you've got a few options. If you are going down the custom dev route to write these, then you can package them up and put them in as a solution. Generally, all the display templates I write are written in SharePoint Designer. They can be pasted in, they can be uploaded as a JavaScript file just by dropping them into SharePoint Designer. It's nice and easy. So we're going into the underscore catalogs of the site collection, where the master pages is, and there's a folder in there called display templates. Now they don't have to be in there. There's a few benefits to putting them in there, but you can put them in site assets. You can make up your own document library, it's not a problem. If you're on premises, you can put them in underscore layouts on the file system. The key thing is how we address them. If you do put them into the display templates catalog, there is an option to set some metadata around them, so we can tell it it's a JavaScript display template. We can tell it what type of control type, whether it's an override or not, and the scope. You absolutely don't have to do any of this. All this does is it surfaces your display templates differently when you're going to add them to views and do stuff through the GUI. If you're just doing this the way we're talking about today through the web parts, you can just upload them and leave them alone. So the way we're adding them is using JSLink. So if, who's using SharePoint 2013 daily at the moment? So again, brilliant. So a good lot of you. So you drop a list view web part on the page, and if you go down to the miscellaneous at the very bottom of the web part properties, there's this wonderful JSLink. And this is where we basically register any multiple overrides. So I've used a token here, tilde site collection. You can use tilde site, tilde layouts, tilde site collection layouts, and tilde site layouts. So what that's basically saying is replace this section with the root of the site collection. The second one down just does to the current web. The next one is obviously the underscore layouts. The last two are underscore layouts, but with respect to the current web that you're in, so either the site collection or the web. I can't think of a reason why you'd need to do that, but nearly everything I do is site collection because we're uploading them locally. So we'll just have a look at how that looks. So I've got a standard task list in SharePoint 2013. Let's stand around here so that it doesn't buzz again. So this is just a standard list item. Let's try around this side without throwing the water everywhere. Okay, I've lost my mouse. There it is. Okay, so we just drop our page into edit mode. So all I've got here is a few tasks sitting in a SharePoint task list. And what I'm going to do is add a field rendering display template that's going to take our percentage complete and make it a visual bar. There we go. So down in the web part properties, here's our JSLink. Here's one I prepared earlier. I originally used to do this cut and paste, and it's so much easier just by putting a fake one in, because it doesn't blow up like XSLT does. It just ignores it. So there we go. I'll stop editing. So straight away, we've got a more visual representation of what that 87% means. You know, you don't necessarily have to look at the figure. You can just take a very quick glance, and you can see it very quickly at a glance, you know, which projects are doing well, which are slow. So we're starting to visualize data a lot better. Okay, so we get our JS links in, and we get our display templates active. But the next thing that happens is stuff breaks. It just does. It will do. You know, we're human. We type things, we copy things from the net, and we copy them wrong. Cut and paste doesn't always work. So how do we troubleshoot them? So the main thing I use is the IE developers toolbar. Yes, other debuggers do exist. Chrome, Firefox, they both have their own debuggers. The main reason I use IE developers toolbar is because I use IE. You know, we're working with SharePoint, and the best supported browser, whether we like it or not, is Internet Explorer. So you can bring up the developers toolbar, and we can just select just our display template now. So whereas with XSLT it was all server-side, you couldn't step through the code, we can now step through what our display template's actually doing. So we can see the values of any of the items that we're working with as we go. So this is what my script would look like in the display template. So we can set breakpoints. You know, who would have loved to have breakpoints in XSLT? It would have been awesome. Sadly, we didn't have them, but we can in JavaScript. We can also use Fiddler. So who's familiar with Fiddler? Excellent. My session's just getting easier. It's brilliant. So Fiddler's an HTTP proxy. So basically, it puts itself between your client machine and SharePoint, whether that's Office 365, an on-premises box, something in Azure. So that shows us a few things. We can see the session loading, so we can see all the articles on the page being called. So one of the things this helps us is, did I type in that JSLink correctly? Where I had JSLink with the remove in it before, that would have been a wonderful, you know, file not found error here. So we can see our HTTP status requests. We can see that the display template's being rendered, being loaded properly. So we can discount the fact we've typed it wrong as being an error. So we'll have a very quick look at the dashboard. So literally, I'll just hit F12. Let's make this full screen. Cool. Okay, so when we're working with display templates, we're interested in the script tab. And the first page you get is the actual SharePoint page itself. But now it varies slightly between which version of IE you're using. Sometimes there'll be a button up here, otherwise there's a button here. And this shows us every single JavaScript that's being called. So there's obviously core.js, a lot of the out-of-the-box ones, but what we're interested in is my custom one here. So I name mine all the time with CSR for client-side rendering, OVR for override. And this is our code. So I'm not minimizing any of my code. These scripts are so small that it's kind of pointless. Plus, because I'm sharing them as well, I want people to be able to read what we're doing. So the beauty is I can set a breakpoint at this point, start debugging. There we go. So we can stop at that point. And now I can start looking at things like the CTX object. So if I right-click that and add a watch, I can now expand that item, and I can start looking at things like the current item. So we can see our title, we can see all the various dates. We can also see the internal field names. So where you're wanting to play around with these items, you're getting all this good information that's going to help you develop your templates. So I'll remember to stop debugging this time. When I last did this session and I did the demos, I carried on gaily and forgot I'd left it in breakpoint. And so why is my demo not working? So display templates, there has to be a catch, and unfortunately there is. So we've talked about the load issue, so if you've got a very sort of less powerful client machine, there's a couple of other options. So the minimal download strategy. So is everyone aware of what the minimal download strategy is in 2013? Yeah, I'm not seeing too many blank faces. So basically, it's a way of just reducing the amount of traffic coming out of the host. Again, cloud, anyone? Is that why they've done this by any chance? The other issue is multiple list views on the page. So I talked about we're registering this against a list template type. So we're registering against list template 100, which is custom list. If you've got two list views on the same page from the same base view ID of 1 and list template type of 100, your display template will be attached to both of them, regardless of where you've applied it just to one web part. There is a way around it. We've got a fix for that, so I'll show you that. And the last one is changing SharePoint functionality. And this is kind of, you're not going to notice it necessarily. So when I did the field rendering setup, and we took that project from 87% and we made it visual, when I did that, all the checkboxes on the left-hand side just disappeared. And we're like, okay. So I had a chat with Martin Hatch, one of the guys in the UK that I work quite closely with. And he said, yeah, no, I've done that. He said, you need to call this function. And it's like, okay. So you're going to start, if you start doing detailed stuff in this, you are going to start having to dig through some of the Microsoft JavaScript, which is really, really fun. If you do that, I posted on my blog about how to point your web pages to debug versions using Fiddler. And that's really worth it. Just download the core.debug.js, have that locally, use Fiddler to point to that, and then you can actually read the code that Microsoft have put rather than their horrible minimized stuff, which is A equals 1 plus. No one can debug that. So minimal download strategies. Our display templates work perfectly the first time the page loads. But then anything that causes a refresh just goes back to the standard list view, and you're like, here's my lovely graph. It's gone. And that's because our JavaScript doesn't get called a second time. So all of the demo pieces that I've got, the scripts that you can use, will have the workaround. The first one is turn off minimal download if you're not using it. It's not really the recommended one. It's there for a reason. It's there to make the experience more fluid for the users. So try and avoid turning it off. The other thing is we can call a particular function in our code called register module init. And what that does is that actually tells SharePoint, when you reload the page using MDS, make sure you call me as well. You know, it's like being left at the back of the bus stop queue and someone not telling you that the bus has come. So that simple one line just makes sure that you're not killed by MDS. We also have the issue of multiple list views on the page, so I explained that. We've got our custom template type 100. So we put two list views on the page and we think, right, I'm going to have my list of shops, and this is my list of shops with pictures, and I want this to be the filter for that. So that's good. I'm going to style my shops with my nice picture. And then you apply that JSLink, and boom, they both start rendering pictures, and you're like, what's going wrong? So there is a workaround. We have to do a little bit in the JavaScript to basically replace that base view ID. There's a workaround on my blog that's linked there, which will just get around this. Will you hit it? It really depends if you're going to start doing heavy dashboarding. If you're going to do a lot of dashboards, then you're probably going to hit that problem. If you're just doing a single list view, you shouldn't need to worry about it. And the changing breaking SharePoint. So this was the particular bit for the hierarchy tasks list. So where you were able to multi-select in this list view for the projects, that's what put it back in. So we're going to talk about the page lifecycle. So this is what's actually happening in SharePoint as this is loading. So the first thing that happens is whenever we register a JS link in a web part, SharePoint outputs all of these in the very header of the page. So it makes sure that all of our display templates are registered before the data starts appearing on the page. Then your actual list view data, so all those list items that we want to play with, they're all in the page in a JSON object format. So basically, if you go into the script view in IE Developers Toolbar, you scroll down your page, you're down on line 830 here, that's actually what's being output onto the page itself. So this is all our data. So again, another place to get your internal field names. At the very bottom of that, there's a little function call that says, render this web part. And it's that render this web part that goes and does all the hard work. So the first thing it does is it calls get template. So again, this is all the Microsoft code doing the work here. We're not having to do any of this. The important thing here is that we've registered our override. And it's this that says, oh, are there any overrides registered here? So it goes in and it gets the context object, it gets the list of overrides, and it goes, is there a better override than the Microsoft one? We go, yes, we've won. And our nice rendering appears. If for any reason that battle fails, you just get that. So it's a good sign if your display template's working properly, is if the list view appears, you've either got a bug in the JavaScript or you're not winning. We've gone really fast. Am I talking too quick for people? Because that's probably the problem. So I've got a few demos. And one that seemed fairly suitable for Stockholm was city temperatures. So I was told to expect Stockholm to be really, really cold, and I was quite lucky that we're having quite unseasonable weather. London is just warm and drab. And I was quite surprised at Vegas. So who's going to the SharePoint conference in Vegas? Excellent, see you there. SharePoint, Sunday night, don't miss it. So, it's not very informative, is it? We're seeing a list of numbers, we're seeing cities. It's not telling us much. That's what I didn't do this morning. So we can start improving this by using some field overrides. So we can make the data slightly more visual, so we can see when it's cold just at a glance. Still not ideal. It's just a list of numbers. We're human beings. We like visual things and loud noises. So I'm using HighCharts here. So HighCharts is a JavaScript plugin. You can use it in any website. And all we're doing is we're taking that SharePoint list data, we're putting it into the right format for HighCharts and saying, here you go. So I'm just showing the temperatures for 2012 here, although I haven't put 2012 on there. We can see at a glance when Stockholm's cold. You can see when Vegas is lovely and warm. Why have they done the conference in March when it's 12 degrees? That would be good. June would be 28 degrees. We like that. So it's a lot more visual. When I first built this demo, I did the bar graphs horizontally, and it just looked wrong. So you need to visualize your data in a way that makes sense to people. People are used to seeing temperatures go up and down, not side to side. Side to side didn't work. It does work as a line chart, though. So we can see, talking too much. So the HighChart, if anyone's interested in HighCharts, go and have a look at their website. They've got some really good ones. They do lots of temperature gauges. This is a really good way of doing Excel services on the cheap, on standard. Okay, pay attention to what you're doing when you're trying to talk as well. So yeah, if you're just using the standard license, I'm going to be in here with a cloth later, tidying up my mess. If you're using the standard license, this is a great way of doing, a bit of BI on the cheap. So I mentioned our issues we were having with multiple list views. So this was the shop format idea that I was playing with. So the idea here is we're just using lists with filters. So I want to see my Finchley shop. But these are just two list views. They're not exactly styled. Not that the demo's much better. As soon as I apply a JSLink, I start having this problem. That list view on the left that doesn't have a picture is trying to render a picture. And one on the right renders nicely. So by applying the fix, then we get our proper. So this is the kind of behavior we wanted to see, rendered properly, although I now have a big space in the page. So that's the issue with multiple list parts using one display template. Again, so the about my team. So I had a client, basically they said, right, each team type, we want to see the hierarchy. We want to know, who's in charge, who the senior guys are. They said, we don't really like this. And they couldn't use people search because their AD was frankly a mess. I mean, who's got a client that's got a perfect AD? That manager field's always correct, isn't it? Yeah, never. So they wanted a way of showing the hierarchy. And they did a list view, and everyone had their little short bio. And that was okay. But by using our the About My Team, we can actually start to show a hierarchy. So we can see the architect. Any second now, the pictures will come in. So the pictures are coming from the profile. Guess what? I didn't warm up. I warmed up everything except the My Sites. So we can start to see a hierarchy come in, and we can start to make the views more interactive. So we can click to go to the profile. We're only showing the senior guys' bios, so what we can do is we can have a hover over. So we can start to make these views more interesting to the users. And that's really what display templates are about. They're about kind of getting our users involved, getting them a bit more interactive, keeping their interest, because let's face it, list views on their own are just boring. We had another one. There was a client of mine emails their weekly report. Big 4 meg Word document to 2,500 people. Exchange guys love it. And they say, it takes so long. It takes them about 3 hours to write this document. They get all their reports in through email. So, well, why not have each guy's PA do the report in SharePoint and let SharePoint do the work? So, again, nice, simple. It looks better on a bigger screen. We can set up seniority so the right people appear in the right places. And this is just using SharePoint page data. So this is the publishing HTML, so they can do their styling, they can do pictures. We're not doing anything custom here. This is literally taking the output of the page and putting it into our list view through the template. Things like the styling, the color bars and that can be selected by them selecting which department this update's for. And then you can also have some fun. So back in the 80s in England, we had a game called Blockbusters, and I believe there was a version here in Sweden called 2mot1, or I don't know any of the numbers in Sweden, so I apologise for my pronunciation. But is this familiar to any of you guys from Sweden? No, don't remember Blockbusters at all? No, okay. So Blockbusters, it was around for ages, and you had all these university types. And the big one was, I'll have a pee please, Bob, which might not translate as well. But this is just a list view at the end of the day. So we can have our question here. Which A leads the round table? It's Arthur. And the way that happened was they could work their way across the board. And again, this is... doesn't want to work. There's something wrong with that column. The idea was that they did Blockbuster. They got from top to bottom or left to right, depending which team they were in. That was a great game show. I love that. The other one, Countdown. Is everyone familiar with Countdown? This really isn't going to work here, is it? Right, so Countdown in the UK is basically a word game. And they would pick consonants and vowels and basically try and come up with a word. So we'll pick a few.
Sometimes very rude, wasn't it?
Yeah, there was some very good ones came out sometimes. So what would happen is when they picked the very last one, they got 30 seconds. So I'll challenge someone to come up with a nice word for me now from these letters. And there is a giveaway. Gives me a chance to have a drink as well. And if you come up with a Swedish word, I will have it verified by a speaker. So they got 30 seconds, and this became quite a famous piece of music, especially the last bit. So who's got a word for me? Lovely. Right, so I said at the start of the start of the session, that I do wood turning, so I'm going to give you a handcrafted pen. That was made at a charity event about 4 or 5 weeks ago. Okay. Anyone else have a word? No? So there is another tradition in the UK that the person who comes last gets this thing called the wooden spoon. So Andy, you get what's called a spurtle. So it's a wooden spoon for porridge. I've got two more if there's any questions. So, let's go back to the slides. Oh, look, he's saving me the job. Thank you. Okay, so we've got a little bit of time left. So have we got any questions? I've got a few more slides after this, but I'd like to do questions first, and then we'll go to the last couple of slides.
Is it basically the same framework no matter what type of display templates you use? You know, search, list view,
There's some differences. So I would recommend you go to Ilio's session after this one. He's going to talk about how things like the control templates, which are kind of like the wrappers, and how they work specifically in search and the content query web parts. So definitely go and have a look at his one. Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, Paul, what's the funkiest one you've had to put together for a client?
The funkiest one I've had to put together.
I don't know if funky translates.
So actually, the Blockbusters one came about because someone wanted a navigation object that was made up of hexagons. So the company logo is hexagon shaped. So when I was doing that, we built this big full-page navigation. It's all driven by search. It was using display templates for search. And it basically puts a hexagon up for every search result. And then we had to calculate the offset. So it was good fun. It was quite hard work, and we got it there. And the other one was a fixed navigation structure based on the periodic table. So you guys familiar with what the periodic table is? Does that translate perfectly? Cool. That was a behemoth of a navigation system, but for the client that was for, their whole business methodology was based on the periodic table. And it was their own version of it, but they had, this is how we start our projects, this is the medium, this is the handover, and this is how we support it. And they had to work through every single phase. And so they said, hey, we want you to put this in SharePoint, and every block should take us to a different place in SharePoint. Like, great, that's going to be so easy. And it worked really well in display templates. I did it for them in 2010, originally using a fixed XML viewer, an XSLT. And I've never written so much XSLT in my life. It was horrendous. It probably took me a week and a half. To convert that into a display template took me a day. So, you can see for yourself the difference between display templates and XSLT. It's a massive saving in time. Any other questions? Oh, so you're all going to go to the exhibition hall a bit earlier for your next session. So you can apply a JSLink to a view. The only problem is you can only do that through PowerShell. So that's out for Office 365. But if you're on premises, absolutely, you can build your views, and through PowerShell you can apply the JSLink to that. Then if you save that list as a template, the JSLink goes with it. So that works. So I mean, primarily I'm coming at this obviously from an end user IT pro rather than dev. If you're doing that kind of sort of display template provisioning, you probably want to look at wrapping it up in a solution. And again, I'd recommend Elio's session for that. He'll talk more about, I think, the deployment and that kind of thing. Primarily today we're talking SharePoint Designer, which if you're doing Office 365 is pretty much your only option anyway, unless you use sandbox solutions, but of course they're deprecated as well. So. And there's no point doing a display template in an app because you can't address it. So, yeah. Who likes app development? I'm just not surprised. Cool. Any more questions? Okay, so a couple of call to actions from this. If you're interested in JSLink, but perhaps want to just dig a bit more into the, why we're doing it, how we're doing it, where's Preston? He was the guy that probably came out with the most information right at the start. Really nice guy, and he's the guy that I learnt most of this JSLink stuff from. Again, Martin Hatch, he's done a nice 7-part series, primarily with a dev focus. So you are going to be looking at a lot more code. And then my blog, I've got a few posts up there. So the first one is using the multiple list view issue. And then the second one is sorting out local JS files using Fiddler. Again, all the slides and that will be available afterwards, so don't worry too much if you can't write those down. Don't forget SharePoint at the end today. So if you do come up with any questions, grab me. I'll be wandering around the exhibition hall for the rest of the day. I'll definitely be at the SharePoint because we're English, we do that. I didn't have an animation on there. Oh, that's because it's not my slide. So yeah, so right on the way out, hit the button. Let me know what you think. It's really good for us speakers to get a feedback. Someone said to me, you probably won't get many questions because the Swedes are very polite and they don't like to speak in public, so that's fair enough. So if you do have any questions, just come and grab me anywhere in the hall. That's fine. Thank you very much for coming to my session. I thought there was one more, but that's it. Thank you very much.